Laraque. I'm here with Ichiro Lambe, and we are going to be talking about a number of things today on GPS. Just want to say thank you for coming on and talking with us. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Now, you have a great game that we're going to be talking about today, and one of the things that we like about it is because, you know, a lot of people talk about the story in games, and one of the things that you know, a lot of people often don't think about is the writing that goes behind a game, and that's one of the things that I'm into. I like writing stories, fiction, things like that, and I think at one time or another, a lot of people, you know, might try their hands at fiction. There's a lot of people that write fan fiction, things like that. So, you know, the idea of actually writing out, a story, but this time, you know, being able to live it is fascinating. But we always like to start, you know, at the beginning, you know, how someone got into it, how someone got into gaming. So you yourself, can you tell us a little bit about your gaming background, like what games you grew up with?
Sure. Well, so I was a true child of the 80s, and I think the first console I ever touched was the Atari 2600. So I grew up with the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64 and that kind of, you know, that generation of games. And I actually missed the whole Nintendo thing because I was already sitting on a computer programming at that point. So, you know, everything from the 80s onward. If you remember, I guess my favorite game from the 8-bit era was Mule by Danny Buntenberry, one of Electronic Arts' first titles.
Okay, so I mean, from there, how did you get the leap to want to actually, you know, work with games, to create games? You know, because I know a lot of people can play games and you get excited and want to do it, but then, you know, there's still a daunting task to want to actually learn and dive into it. So what was it that made you want to make that leap?
Mm-hmm. When I was 7 years old, instead of throwing me a softball, my father sat me down in front of a TI-99 4A, a Texas Instruments computer.
I actually had that.
You had one?
I played Metal Munchers.
Uh-huh.
You know, so I mean, games like that. I actually, my uncle split between, you know, playing Metal Munchers, and I actually had the mathematics programs. I like when I had the voice synthesizer. It always scared me because, like, when it was time for you to do the project, it would go, your turn. And it would actually like shock me. But yeah, I actually, my uncle had the TI-99 4A. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, you were lucky to have the speech synthesizer. I remember it sounded so real to me back then, and then you go back to it, and then, like you say, it sounds like this. But maybe I'm remembering it through the hazy gloss of memory. But yeah, I started out on one of those, and when I was in high school, a friend and I, you know, I had been creating games for myself. A friend and I got together and we said, you know, let's make a game and try to sell it. And so back then there was the bulletin board systems, if you may remember, you know, the online stuff, back when online meant like the 300 baud modem. And we created a bulletin board system doors game, all text, and we sold it for $10 a copy. And we made enough so that each of us was able to buy a new computer, a brand new Amiga 2000, if I recall correctly. And I said to myself, my gosh, I can actually make games and make money at this? So I was hooked. And ever since then, on and off, throughout my life, I've been creating games. And, you know, I got my first job in the industry in '92. I co-founded my first company in games around '94, '95, and then Dejobaan was founded, my current company, in '99.
And I'm glad that you said again, because that's one of the things, Dejobaan, before the show, you know, I'll admit it to all the people watching this, that I have a problem sometimes with the names, and I want to make sure I get the names. So with Dejobaan, you know, how did you first come to work with them?
Well, so in '99, my first company's you know, was going along, and they were doing an online game, and I said to myself, you know, I want to create games that are small and sort of very personal to me. So I went off and I became, you know, bedroom coders. Like, you know, they call them indies nowadays, but back then it was just sort of like shareware authors. And I said to myself, I just want to program games. myself. And so I sat down and I started working on this really, really big project that was going to be a sort of an online game taking the direction that I wanted to do. And as you might imagine, the large online world was a little much for one person to handle. This was right after I graduated from college. But as a side thing, I was working on the Palm Pilot, if you remember that, back in the day. It was like a cell phone without the cell phone part. And when I remember that I was at the mall waiting for my then girlfriend to try clothing on, and I started plinking around programming games for the Palm Pilot on the Palm Pilot. And I would sit in coffee shops and just sit at home and I would write games. And it was the Palm Pilot that was really the first viable platform for me, because I could write these wonderful little tiny games by myself and people would buy them.
And the thing is that when it comes to actually deciding what type of games that you want to create, I mean, did you have a vision overall of what you wanted to work for? Because we wanted to create for, because a lot of times people will go based on their influences, what they grew up with, or they'll look at what was out there and they'll say, hey, you know what? I'm tired of seeing these type of games like either a Call of Duty or something. I want to create this type of game. Like, we've talked with people who grew up with point-and-click adventures, so they say, I want to create that kind, or an adventure type game. Was that the same with you, or was it overall open? It just, whatever strikes you at the time, that's what you want to create?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Those are two sort of competing things that pull at each other, right? I mean, on one hand, I've played games all my life, and I'm like, I want to create a game like this that takes all the great stuff and then makes it better. And then there's the other thing where they're like, these games have already been made. We can do anything. I mean, that's an entire universe for us to code in. What can I create that's new? So over the course of my career, I think I've tried to do a little of each. And it's sort of like it's a spectrum. And so some of our games fall more towards the traditional, and some of them fall more experimental. And sometimes, it's tricky to figure out what works and what doesn't. So the experimental games sometimes work out because they're so new, right? I mean, we're doing Elegy for a Dead World. We just launched it. It's a game where you write as the main mechanic, and that's kind of scary. And then our previous game was Drunken Robot Pornography, cleanest game on the internet. It was a first-person bullet hell shooter where you took down these giant 12-story robots, and that's a first-person shooter. It was more traditional. So I think I absolutely do both ends of the spectrum, and it's kind of fun to play at all areas there.
Right, and that's what I wanted to dive into, because that's what I saw when it came across, and I saw Yoji, and that's one of the things. As I said, being into writing, and one of the things that got me into writing way back in the day was like the choose your own adventure books. Seeing the different stories, and then seeing like Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. I like the different ideas of one-off stories, science fiction, like I said, fan fiction. So with Elegy for a Dead World, can you just start off with just telling us a little bit about that?
Dear traveler, we have received your message that your vessel has been destroyed and your colleagues have been lost. Your mission is unchanged. Explore the 3 lost civilizations and record your findings. When your computer prompts you to write, use your keyboard to complete the entries as shown here. The prompts identify points of interest and provide a catalyst for your writing, but you may also record your thoughts freeform. When you have completed this analysis, it will become a matter of public record, a final elegy to these dead worlds. We know you are lost, but we will find a way to bring you home. Write your stories. share them, and we will all hear you.
Sure. So it started out as a game that I had always wanted to create since I was 10 years old. By then I had graduated to the Atari 800, and my thought was, wouldn't it be great to write a game where you just walked to the right and explored and you saw stuff? And they call them walking simulators nowadays. Last year, while we were working on Drunken Robot Pornography and Drop That Beat Like an Ugly Baby, No Babies Harmed, which was our other action title, I said, gosh, we've been working on these so hard, we need a break. So I reached out to a fellow independent developer in the Boston area, Pop Cannibal, Zyba Scott, and said, you just want to get a group together and do a one-week project. And so we did that, and Zyba said, the idea of the side-scrolling walker is great. Why don't we make this be about British Romance-era poets? And I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? But it worked, because a lot of those wrote about the end of the world and these great landscapes. And so we did that, and as we were doing that, we were sitting down in a way that I thought that game development was always going to be when I was a kid. We had pieces of paper out, we had our markers, and we were writing these worlds out. And we sat down a fellow game developer and we said, what do you think is happening in this? Because we wrote our own story entirely visually. And he sat down and he came up with his own story for what was happening in that world. And a few weeks later we said, you know what? This is what our game is about. It's not about us telling you a story. It's about you telling your own story.
So that's the thing. A lot of times, I know that with gamers today, you have a bunch of different people. And I think that's a great thing about indie games and people who have that imagination. What would you say to people who, I guess maybe someone may not admit it, but maybe someone who's worried about it? Because even on the website it'll say, like, what if I'm not a writer? But what if they go even a little bit farther? What if they say, what if I'm not the kind of kid that can close my eyes? I think of the Bart Simpson part in The Simpsons where he tries to close his eyes and imagine a story of his own, and he can't, and he's like, damn you, television. What happens with that kind of gamer?
Gosh, here's the thing. I think we as humans are innately creative, and I see evidence of this all the time. Go to social media. You see Twitter, you see Imager, you see Facebook. People are telling stories. They tell stories about what happened to them in a particular day. They tell little stories about what they're thinking about. On Imager, okay, we got a bunch of image macros, but you got people making up little things. They'll take video and they'll turn them into animated GIFs and put little, like, here's what's happening in these that's not really happening in the video, right? I mean, that is storytelling. We create narrative, whether we sit down and do it on a blank piece of paper, or if we do it on our Facebook feed, or if we do it in 140 characters or less. So the trick isn't getting people to become creative. The trick has been to sort of unleash that creative potential, to allow people to feel comfortable enough. And in early versions of Elegy, we actually showed players the screen. You do this side-scrolling thing where you're walking past these broken ruins, and we said, hit enter anywhere to write about these ruins. And the writers sat down and they knew exactly what to do. They wrote, and they wrote consistently. And people who were not formally trained to do that said, oh my God, I'm in front of a blank piece of paper, what do I do? So it was actually at a conference, if you know the Game Developers Conference, we were sitting in, I think it was called Tintin, a Vietnamese restaurant, with two game developers, Danny Day and Dean Tate. Danny Day was an indie developer. Dean Tate was formerly, I think, was he the lead designer on Dance Central? He worked at Harmonix. And Zyba and I sat there and we're like, man, we're having this problem. We're putting this thing in front of people and they're sort of locking up. And I believe it was Danny who said, listen, why don't you give them a framework? Why don't you give them some words to work with and then allow them to fill in the blanks? And we're like, oh, that's really awesome. So we tell them a little bit about the world and then let them finish the rest. So I'm like, off in the distance you see blank. And what ends up happening is if people are engaged in that, they will spend like a half an hour sitting there writing for just one story across 10 blanks. And that's amazing. I mean, I think that's that allows people to feel creative.
That's really cool because in you get that exploration feel, and a lot of people who are just used to watching, like you watch even in just regular television, you watch those exploration shows like on Nat Geo or something, and you'll see like old ruins, or they'll uncover something, and then they'll narrate it or they'll tell you something, and then you can think to yourself, hey, I could come up with my own story. Mm-hmm. Here you have Alien Worlds, and they have a lot of games like that. So you have the beautiful landscape, the colors and stuff, which I thought is really good. The artwork and stuff is really great. And I think that's good that you give the gamers, a little bit of help, but then they fill in some more. So you almost have a little bit like, it kind of gives me like that Myst feel, but that it's not such a hard puzzle. But then you have the writing aspect, and I thought it's really well done. And so that you get that exploration part. So, I mean, I thought that you did that well. So you have the writing, but then and the music as well.
Thank you. Well, you talk about puzzles. What we wanted to do with Elegy in the more, so there are 3 worlds, and there are 27 what we call, writing prompts or challenges. And the tougher ones, we wanted to try to figure out what a puzzle would look like in writing. And so I'm going to give a spoiler away here to your audience, and I don't know if you've played this particular one, but there's one challenge where you are somebody who's visiting this long-dead world who knew about it before it was destroyed, and you're talking, you're prompted to essentially write about how beautiful it was, and what you thought the people were like, and this and that, and what a shame it is for it to be destroyed. And then we throw a twist in. Halfway through the writing prompts, you find out that you were the one that destroyed it, and from then on, it becomes a challenge to figure out how do you justify having destroyed it, and yet reconcile that with everything that you had written before. So all of that is our attempt at creating what we call a writing puzzle.
That's pretty cool. And then as far as, when you're done, you could also share so that other people can see like what you've put together as well. So that's cool, so that other people can see, your creative, spin on things, which is cool, because everyone's going to have a different take. It's not like it's cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the Oh gosh, we love to tell stories. We as humans love for people to hear stories and to tell us, wow, what a good story, here's my take on it. And we've tried to replicate that in Elegy.
Awesome. So Elegy is out right now. You can get it for both Windows and for Mac. Also for Linux, that's right?
Yep, we hit the trifecta.
That is all. You would make that community happy.
I hope so.
And you can pick it up on Steam, so it's available right now. That is cool. All right, so I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking with us. You know, I hope that everyone out there goes and checks this out, you know, because it's really cool. I mean, I like exploration games, especially one that looks really cool like this. And the writing aspect is really cool. And for people out there that's like, oh my God, writing, you know, don't be nervous, don't be scared. It's not daunting. It's not like English class where the teacher makes you write some long term paper. It's really fun. But I want to thank you for coming on Gamer Profiles and talking with us.
Well, thanks very much. The game is as you say, live on Steam right now. It's available for $15, Windows, Mac, Linux, and you can go to maybe you could put a link up to our site, Dejobaan.com, and our partners on this is Pop Cannibal, who also did a wonderful game called Girls Like Robots.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you again for coming on and talking with us, and we will be back very soon with another Gamer Profile show. Until then, I'm Jay Laraque, and remember our motto, never stop gaming.